My name is Josh, and I'm currently 20 as I'm writing this. This happened almost 4 months ago when I moved out of state to start my first semester of college. My financial aid would not cover housing, so I found myself scrambling to find off-campus housing. Fortunately, with the help of my parents, I was able to rent out a house for 2 semesters. It was this small one-storied home that was just a hop, skip, and a jump from campus. It wasn't the nicest house, but it was what I could afford at the time. The majority of people in the surrounding homes were a lot older than me, though that was expected when living off campus. However, there was this one guy who lived a couple houses down that gave off a really weird vibe. If I had to guess, I'd say he had to be in his late 50s or early 60s. He would go on long walks with his dog really early in the morning and knock on my door to say good morning. At first, it wasn't that strange, but he began doing this every day, which made me a bit irritated. On top of this, he would always try to strike up these long, unnecessary conversations that I wasn't interested in. If I ever made up an excuse as to why I couldn't talk to him, he'd disregard my words and do it anyway. It even came to a point where I told him I was late for class, and he had walked with me to campus. The only time he'd ever leave is if I went into class or in one of the buildings. No matter how many times I tried getting him to go away, he still persisted. I'd give him a dry response, he'd only talk more. I'd walk faster, he'd walk faster. This went on for a good 2 weeks before I finally told him in the most polite way to leave me alone in the mornings as I had school. He seemed to have understood, but also gave me this look of pure disappointment. I felt bad, but I legitimately couldn't have him doing what he's been doing anymore. I remember one of the other neighbors telling me he apparently suffered from some personality disorder, but that he didn't have a history of violence or anything. I asked why he seemed to only be acting like this towards me, and he told me that it wasn't his place to decide who lived there, as that decision was up to the property manager. Weeks went by, and I hadn't seen him at my door, nor did I see him come out of his house with his dog. I thought of this as suspicious, but dismissed it as him respecting my wishes by leaving me alone. Those weeks were normal, with me focusing on my studies, being social with friends, etc. Life went on as usual after that, until one night where something happened I didn't expect. I was in my room studying for one of my midterms when I hear something small hit my window. The curtains were covered, so I wasn't able to see what it was. About 10 seconds later, I hear it again and then came to the conclusion that it was a small rock hitting my window. This time, I got up and opened my curtains to see the man standing still as a statue outside. As if that wasn't strange enough by itself, he wasn't even on the sidewalk, but rather on the driveway of the house. By this point, it was decently late and decided to call it a night. I simply ignored him by closing my curtains, even though I was terrified inside. I shut off all the lights, making sure to lock every door and window in the house to ensure he didn't come in. The next morning, I carefully unlocked the front door to check if he was still out there. When the coast was clear, I booked it toward campus where I was constantly looking back to make sure I wasn't being followed. I went to my classes, hung out with some of my friends, and by the time evening hit, I walked back home and was met with a sight I wasn't expecting. There were about 3, maybe 4 police cars along with an ambulance parked outside my house, their lights flashing over the sound of radio chatter. I saw paramedics putting a man I had never seen before on a stretcher and into the ambulance. I then saw police handcuffing my creepy neighbor and putting him into a police cruiser. When I basically demanded to know what was going on, they told me that the person harmed was actually the meter reader. I completely forgot about this, as I've only ever met the meter reader once, and that was when I moved in. By law, a meter reader can typically enter a home whether you're there to let them in or not. He had keys to my house and entered through the back door to check the meters in the basement. Waiting for him in the basement was my neighbor, who jumped him with one of my kitchen knives and jammed it into his shoulder. The reason he was in my house was to probably wait for me until I got home. He must have mistaken the meter reader for me, and that's when he attacked. To my surprise, someone in the area had spotted the man entering the house through a window before the reader got there and called the police. A couple days later, I was moved to a different location off campus and was actually reimbursed for what my family paid. I'm graduating in a couple years, and while I'm definitely going to miss college, I sure hope I don't ever encounter something like that again. About 2 years ago, I bought a house for the first time ever at only 28 years old. It was my first ever real investment, you can say, and I couldn't be prouder of myself. I worked in the entertainment industry for big celebrities/social media influencers and stuff like that, so I made decent money. Most of my neighbors were nice. Some had kids, some didn't, and sort of just kept to themselves. It was just me and my dog Milo. Milo was a pure white Dogo Argentino with the height of a small horse and a bite so powerful it could tear a limb off. All I have to say is, good luck breaking into my house with him around. My first week of moving in, I met one of my neighbors who gave me the all too familiar greeting followed by a batch of sugar cookies. The usual welcoming you'd commonly see when someone moves into a new neighborhood. She introduced herself as Brenda and told me she had lived just up the street and that it was nice to meet me. She was the sweet little old lady who had the heart of gold and was a joy to anyone. Brenda had went on to explain that her cookies were homemade and that it was her very own recipe. Surprisingly enough, I was actually allergic to wheat flour, but I wasn't going to be rude and decline them. I just put them on the kitchen counter, wondering if I should throw them away or give them to someone in need. By this point, I had successfully moved everything in and decided to call some of my childhood friends over to come and celebrate with some beer. It was already 9 and I had to get to bed early for work the next morning, so I knew my friends couldn't stay long. When they arrived, we had seen a football game on TV, had some dinner, and just enjoyed ourselves. At one point, we're all talking amongst ourselves, having a blast with beers in our hands, when I see Milo staring at me in this weird position. I playfully asked him what was up, and he responded with faint whimpers as he laid back down. It was then when I immediately knew something was wrong. I had Milo for almost 5 years now, and not once did I ever see him behave like this. Now, I'm obviously no expert or anything, but it was almost as if his attitude kept changing every few minutes. One minute he'd be happy, the next he'd be sad, and the next minute just flat out angry. His demeanor completely altered. One of my friends had a girlfriend who was a vet, and he was able to FaceTime her where I was able to tell her what was going on. She immediately started asking if I fed him something he shouldn't have eaten or if he were on medication. I was about to say no when I remembered about the cookies I had left on the table. Sure enough, I found a chewed up plastic plate along with half a dozen of those cookies devoured scattered across the hallway. Milo must have helped himself to my special treat when I wasn't looking, and I guess I didn't notice until now. 2 of my friends had to leave while the other one had decided to help me rush Milo to the vet. Turns out, he was just on the verge of death when we got there, as the vet explained he was displaying unusual symptoms. They ran a few tests on him, and what they found shocked them to their core. High traces of brodifacoum were found in Milo's system. It's a seriously dangerous poison used for killing larger rodents like possums and other pests. When ingested or consumed by humans, it causes your body to shut down your organs to the point where your body doesn't even know how to fight it off. It starts off mild, but gradually develops over a few hours. We later found out that it had been embedded inside of the cookies. Law enforcement had taken down my information about the woman who gave me those cookies, and after a whole search of the neighborhood, she was never found. To be completely honest with you, I wasn't even sure if she even lived in the neighborhood. Why she targeted me and why she laced the cookies with rodent poison is still unclear. Milo thankfully ended up living and is still the happiest companion I know. My wife and I got married and just had our first kid who absolutely adores Milo. I'll protect them all with my life.
I lived in that apartment for just under a year. It was a ground floor, one bedroom on the east side of the complex, a really old building with cheap carpet, that kind of place where your neighbors are close enough to hear you sneeze through that drywall. Still, I guess it was peaceful enough. Most of the tenants were middle-aged or older, quiet folks with too much debt and not enough ambition. You'd hear the occasional shouting match through the vents or catch a late-night party teetering towards chaos, but it was rare. The cops would come maybe twice that whole first 6 months, and neither time did it seem like anything major. For me, I just kept to myself, worked really long hours, came home, ate dinner, watched some TV, and then went to bed. I didn't need noise. I'd had my time in louder and messier places. At this point in my life, this apartment was supposed to be my safe haven, my first real grown-up place, and for a while that's exactly what it was. And things didn't start to get weird until Flynn moved in. He showed up on a Wednesday morning, and I remember it because his moving van was blocking my car in. I had to bang on the cab just to get out to work. He didn't apologize, just gave me this blank stare like he hadn't heard a word that I just said to him. Thin guy, probably in his 40s, but somehow ageless in this way that made it hard to pin him down. Black hoodie, gloves in June, old army boots with the laces triple knotted. Not the kind of look you expect from somebody moving into a low-income housing. I couldn't tell if he was crazy or just eccentric. I introduced myself, got his first name, and that was as much as he was willing to share, at least in the moment. He moved in fast, and within 2 hours the van was gone and Flynn was holed up behind his door and just disappeared. That first week was really quiet, but something about the air near his place started to feel charged, like standing far too close to a buzzing transformer. At night, I'd hear the faint click of metal or the low scratch of something being dragged across concrete out on his patio. Nothing dramatic or nothing you'd call the cops over, but I just noticed it, and it was always after midnight. By week 2, I knew the guy was a complete weirdo. The first time I saw the fire, I thought maybe he was just grilling. I stepped out onto my patio and smelled the burning paper almost immediately. Not charcoal, not meat, just scorched papers and something that smelled like melted plastic. I peered around the divider and there he was. Flynn crouched over this big metal coffee can, feeding papers into the flame like he was praying to it. The way he stared into it, it wasn't normal. It wasn't boredom, but almost devotion. I grew up Baptist. I've seen that same kind of look on people's faces during prayer and sermon. This guy moved in next door to me and he was out of his damn mind. I stood there watching until he glanced my way, not moving, just locking eyes. He didn't say a word, just reached out slowly and placed a lid over the fire, snuffing it out instantly. Then he went back inside. I didn't really sleep that much that night. Just the whole thing kind of put me off. A few nights after that fire, I noticed a new wrinkle in the routine. Flynn had started dragging something across his floor around 2 a.m. This slow and heavy scraping sound, like furniture being moved an inch at a time. I knew it wasn't just my imagination because the baseboard heater on our shared wall would buzz whenever he did it. It only lasted a few minutes, but it was always that same exact sound, like a piece of metal being hauled across tile. I started jotting it all down in a notebook, not because I thought anything criminal was going on, but because I had a feeling that it might get there. Next came the SUV. It was one of those matte black Suburbans you only see in movies or government stings. No plates, tinted windows dark enough to double as mirrors. The first time it showed up, I thought maybe Flynn was dealing drugs or maybe some high-level courier gig or something worse, I don't know. But the men who stepped out didn't look like drug runners, no gold chains or neck tattoos. These guys wore crisp, matching suits, moved like military. Clean-shaven, stoic faces, no wasted movement. They went straight to Flynn's door and knocked once, then walked in without even waiting. The door just opened. I didn't hear any yelling, no loud conversations, not even laughter, just the creak of the furniture and some soft footsteps. I think they stayed maybe 2 hours, then left in that same coordinated fashion, almost like a drill team. The visit happened 3 times in the span of 2 weeks. I attempted to ask Flynn about it. We crossed paths near the mailboxes one morning and I gave him this friendly nod. I asked if he was settling in okay. He didn't look up, just muttered something that sounded almost like fine and kept walking. I followed him a few steps, not aggressively, just to keep the conversation going. I asked him if that black SUV was family or maybe a security firm or something. That's when he stopped, turned, and looked right through me. You know, I'd just mind your own business if I were you, he said. His voice was flat, but there was weight behind it, like a warning that he'd given before. Not angry, not defensive, just a matter-of-fact threat. The kind of man makes when he's not bluffing. I backed up because what more could I do? This guy was clearly mental and also had some kind of security hookup that I did not want to mess with. Still, I couldn't help myself. I bought a cheap dash cam and parked facing the walkway, angled it just enough to catch whoever came or went. I started recording all the late night visits, but after the 3rd black SUV sighting, nothing had happened for weeks. No more fires, no more visitors. Flynn didn't leave his apartment during the day, at least from what I could tell. I started to wonder if he'd even moved out or maybe he was dead up there. Then a couple showed up. It was a Friday night. I just sat down to eat when I heard the purr of a low-slung engine outside. Not a junker or a pickup, this was luxury. I peeked through the blinds and saw a silver McLaren pulled into the visitor spot. 2 people got out, a man and a woman, both in these tailored coats and dressed like they were heading to the red carpet. The woman wore heels so sharp they clicked like gunshots. The man had this navy blazer, clean jawline, hair trimmed to the millimeter. They walked straight to Flynn's unit. He opened up the door before they knocked, and I promise you, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The following wasn't quiet like the other visits. I couldn't make out every word, but the tone was clipped and strained, urgent, bordering on angry. There was pacing, raised voices, Flynn's deeper tone trying to stay calm while the younger guy seemed to push back harder. The woman said very little, but when she did speak, it cut through like a knife. Then abruptly it all stopped. All 3 of them walked out calmly, almost robotically, and Flynn escorted them to their car. He even smiled as they drove off. And that was that. Over those next few days, the silence felt deliberate. Not a creak, not a scrape. Flynn's blinds were always shut tight. The lights were never on, so no smells even coming from his vent. This deep quiet had now settled in. Not long after all of this, a smell did come. It hit me the following Thursday. Just a sour tinge at first, like spoiled milk or wet garbage left out for far too long, but by Friday it was unbearable. I thought maybe something died in the crawl space, so I reported it to the management. They said somebody would come check it out, but nobody did. Saturday morning I left for work with the windows open, my shirt collar pulled over my face. When I got back that evening, the parking lot was filled with patrol cars. 2 cruisers, an unmarked black unit, and an ambulance. Yellow tape across Flynn's door. A crime scene tech squatting by the patio with a clipboard. One of the black-suited men that I'd seen before was now standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching the cops work. He wasn't saying anything. I stood at the far edge of the lot until one of the officers noticed me. He walked over, a really tall guy, maybe his mid-40s, looked really tired, and I asked what was going on. "We found somebody deceased in the unit," he said. "You one of the neighbors?" "Yeah, he lived next door to me. I've been smelling something awful all week." "Well, that was probably him," the officer said flatly. "He's been dead at least that long, and we're still trying to confirm ID." That gave me an opening. I started telling him everything: the fires, the SUV visits, the couple in the sports car, the midnight dragging sound. The officer scribbled down some notes, nodding now and again, but never really looked surprised. "We're not treating this as a homicide, at least at this time," he said finally. "There was no signs of forced entry, no external injuries. Coroner thinks it was natural." I must have looked skeptical because he gave me this half shrug. "These things happen," he said. "Weird guy, weird life. Doesn't always mean some kind of foul play." I watched as they zipped up the body bag and loaded it into the ambulance. That night, I sat in my living room with the lights off, staring at that thin wall between my unit and Flynn's. I thought about everything that I'd seen, everything that I'd heard, and just kept coming back to one detail that I hadn't shared. That last time I saw him, after the couple left, I caught a glimpse of something strange through a sliding door. Just a flash or a reflection maybe. But it looked like a metal table bolted to the floor with heavy leather straps hanging off the sides. It wasn't there before. What apartment would come with something like that? They cleared out Flynn's unit by the following Monday. No hazmat suits, no media coverage, just quiet men with gloves and cardboard boxes. Management didn't send out a notice or even acknowledge the death. I only knew he was officially gone when a cleaning crew came by and gutted the place, ripped up the carpet, pulled the blinds, emptied the fridge. I watched from behind my own curtains that entire time. Nobody took that metal table though, or at least I never saw it come out. It stayed there, square in the center of the room, covered with the tarp. When the crew left for lunch, I slipped out and peeked through the patio door. The straps that I'd seen weren't leather, they were thick canvas, army surplus style, stained with something dark around the buckles. There was a groove in the floor beneath it, almost like scoring from repeated dragging, the kind that you don't get from just one piece of furniture. Flynn had indeed died in that apartment, that much I knew, but nothing about it felt natural at all to me. I'd say a week later, I saw the black SUV again. No police on site this time, no lights, no noise. It pulled up around 5 in the morning and stayed parked for nearly an hour. Nobody went in, nobody came out. Then it just drove off, slow and casual, like it had all the time in the world. I tried looking up Flynn on the internet, but I had no last name to go on. I checked the public records, scanned some arrest reports, even pulled some county death records. Nothing. It was like this guy never existed. The unit stayed empty for months, then eventually a young couple ended up moving in. They hung these fairy lights on the patio, brought a baby home from the hospital, watered plants. Nice people, friendly. But occasionally on warm nights, when they leave the patio door cracked open, I could swear that I hear the same dragging sound through the wall. And I ask myself what that unsuspecting family might be living on top of.